November is a very busy time of the year in the garden. Basically, we're starting to put plants away for the winter. We've already had one or two frosts, but that won't harm what's out now. The question is, if they get harder, then there are serious repercussions. So we're going to concentrate today on our dahlias. Now, there's a very mixed view about this. A lot of people say, what's the point of lifting them? It's going to be a mild winter. And then, of course, if it isn't, the damage is done. If you are deciding to leave them out in your allotment or your garden, when you do cut them down, make sure that you mulch around the base of the plant, 2 to 3 inches of compost or bark mulch or something like that, so that gives them added protection. However, I like to be safe rather than sorry, so we're going to today start talking about the process in order to lift the dahlias for the winter. Now, before we even start, I noticed something that really wants to be removed. This is what I'm talking about, a late attack of mildew. Now, the problem is the spores there that if you would normally not have it, you'd chop all this up and put it on the compost bin. It'll make good compost. However, with the mildew on there, I personally suggest you either burn it or you put it in the recycling bin, because the spores will only settle in the compost and you could have even more problems next year. The first thing you've got to do is to remove all this year's growth. I suggest that it's down to about 6 inches from the base. So, ready to start cutting. You know, one thing, they made an awful lot of growth this year, and we've had a terrific show for them, and that's the whole purpose, is it not? To lift the dahlias, I strongly recommend the fork. If you use a spade, I think you know what's going to happen. So the fork makes it easier to lift the plant, and you start from a distance away, and let's have a go. So having lifted Dahlia tuber, and I must say there's plenty there for next year, but that's another talk. What we need to do is to make sure we remove all of the foliage. We really don't want any of that around the plants at all. And finally the last bit. That can come down there. So there we are. The next thing is when you've got long roots like this is all going to go to sleep for the winter. You don't need it. You just trim those off. Any of the straggly bits, there's enough energy in the plant itself to keep it going. So all of these bits, you just trim them off. There's enough there for it. And right, oh. Having removed all the foliage that you don't want, then examine the tuber. And if there's any, for instance, this bit here, I said the fault doesn't damage it, well I've managed to, but that's got to go. You don't want that to stay on there through the winter, it will just rot. So just conveniently under the tuber itself. God, that's tough. There we are. So any bits like that, definitely remove them. The next thing is to shake off as much of the soil as you can. So there's nothing there, it's just going to let the plant dry out of its own accord. And that's what we're going to be putting away for the winter. Having cleaned up most of the tuber, removed any that you think are damaged or diseased or what have you, the next thing is to actually store it upside down in a container. And the reason for that is within the stem of that plant there's still a lot of water. We want to make sure everything is perfectly dry. So upside down, and I would suggest about 3 weeks, importantly in a frost-free situation. So a garage, maybe under the greenhouse staging or whatever. As long as it's frost-free, leave it there for 3 weeks, check it regularly to see there's nothing wrong with it, and then in 3 weeks' time we move on to the final stage. After 3 weeks we go inspect, fine, everything's fine, all this is dried off. Now's the time to finally prepare it for the winter. So what I suggest you first of all do, you can purchase any sort of fungicide in a garden centre, just as an added precaution. Dust, remember to wear gloves, the fungicide all over the base of the plant. Then, with a decent container, deep enough to take the plant, you need to, in this particular case, I think you'd have to line it with a bit of netting or something like that, otherwise you can see what's going to happen. And then either a Levington-based compost or dry bark mulch. Both of them need to be dry. Don't put wet stuff in. Sprinkle a bit at the bottom, place the plant in the actual container and then just cover it over. Now obviously this is just to give you an idea. I will be using a much deeper container so that we haven't got all this sticking up. Container wants to come up to about there and then just sprinkle around and leave it for the winter. Regularly inspect it through the winter in the shed or wherever you put it, just to make sure nothing's gone wrong. You certainly don't want to give it any water at all, and if we're going to have a really bad frost, minus whatever, then I suggest as an added precaution you put some fleece over the top of it or newspaper, and that is now ready to go to sleep for the winter.